All right, what do we have in the notebook today? Hello everybody, welcome in, welcome back if you've been here before. We're talking about iPhone photography today. What you can do with your phone to either get started with photography or just to use your phone on a regular basis rather than lugging your camera around all the time. Now, yes, it is a good habit to get into to carry your camera around all the time, but as one knows, that is not always possible. But one thing we do always have on us is our cell phones. So I'm going to talk specifically about iPhone today. That's just because that's what I shoot on, or that's what I have, so that's what I shoot on when I do use my camera on my phone. So we're just gonna kind of go over some basics and kind of how to get started on doing this. So the first thing to note is, while you can use these tips and you can get some pretty stellar photos on your phone, shooting on an iPhone is never going to be the same quality as a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. Just because these are professional pieces of equipment specifically for taking photos, while this is just a kind of a computer that does everything and it happens to have a camera on it. Now, these cameras are getting very good, but it will never be up to the same level as a professional camera for photography, videography, whatever you're doing. Now, maybe I'll make another video on this, but today is specifically about photography, but these do shoot 4K 60 frames a second. So that's actually better than the camera that I have here, but photos wise, megapixels wise, you're not gonna get as high of quality with it. All right, so there's kind of three main things. Number one is your lighting. So lighting this is kind of more of a general photography rule. Learn your lighting, learn lighting techniques. That's something that I'm also doing at this time. I kind of have a few lights. I have my hair light, I have my main light, and I kind of have just kind of a key light, get some underlight here so it's not super dark. So it's just something that you need to learn, something you need to learn about angles, maybe times of day to shoot. You don't want to shoot directly at noon. But most importantly, with shooting on your phone, what's going to come first is having enough light. So you definitely need to have enough light to shoot with your phone, or else it's going to look really blurry, it's going to look really grainy, because cell phone cameras are not very good with low light settings. So you also want to use shadows to your advantage. Now you don't want to shoot with your subject directly facing the sunlight. You don't want to shoot with the sunlight directly facing behind you, because it's gonna look like Facetune. There's gonna be no shadows. There's gonna be no contour. Now you can make it work the other way and have the sun directly behind the person, as long as the sun is not interfering with either popping some lens flare on the camera or overexposing anything. Now, one thing I do know that is separate from the iPhones is, I believe on the Google Pixel 4, you can actually adjust your exposure in camera, so it's not going to overexpose photos right there. But with this, you do have to do it afterwards, so just make sure it's not completely blown out so you can recover it a little bit. If you are going to be shooting in the studio with your phone, I don't know when this instance would come up, but maybe you have a studio session going on and you want to take some pictures really quick to throw up on your Instagram story. Now, you can do that. To my knowledge, you cannot hook up your phone to a flash unless you press a shutter on your camera and take the picture on your phone at the same time. You're not going to get a flash. But if you do have steady studio lights like I have for video, then those would work just fine. Just making sure, once again, you have enough light and using your directions so it's not completely blown out. The next thing, kind of just general beginner photography, is compositional methods. Knowing what you're shooting, knowing how to place what you're shooting to make a good composition is just going to up your iPhone photography game that much more. Kind of the biggest player into this is going to be the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is you take kind of like imaginary grid lines, go vertical and horizontal, and split your view into kind of a tic-tac-toe grid. So 3x3, it's gonna have left, middle, right, top, middle, bottom thirds, and you can use those lines and those areas to fill with subject or get some balance, get some contrast. Just as an example, if you're shooting a landscape in front of you, then you, instead of going perfectly 50-50, that never usually turns out too good, maybe you line up the horizon with the bottom third. There you go. So then you have more sky. Maybe you're trying to focus on something on the ground, so maybe you line up the horizon with the top third if your subject matter is in the foreground instead of the sky or the background or just far out in the distance on the horizon. Now you also want to make sure it's balanced. So say maybe we have a foreground, a tree trunk in the foreground here. So That's going to be my hand. So that's going to be actually right on the what would be your left third there, my right. So, and actually if you notice, this corner of my office corner here is actually lined up on a third, on the right third for this video, just for some compositional angles, and because the other angle I had looked like that side was just completely falling off into nothing, and I was kind of being pushed off this way. So we're kind of angled towards the corner a little bit more. I digress. So we have your tree trunk here. And so then I'm the subject here, so now that's going to be a little bit blurred, and now I'm here, and then I have my background behind me. So we have some balance. My hand, which is the tree trunk, is a little bit lighter. Over here it's a little bit darker, and that's perfectly okay. It's a little bit darker above me. My shirt's brighter just because I have this really bright light shining on me. So just kind of making use of balance, contrast. This is all in-camera stuff. This is before we even get to editing, which we'll get to. Making sure your balance is okay. Just kind of framing things and using things within your environment that you're shooting in to help. Now the rule of thirds, honestly, I can make an entire video on just the rule of thirds, which maybe I will, who knows, or compositional methods in general. It's just kind of something that if you pick up the basics on and you kind of keep playing with it and you try to use those areas and those different methods to line up your shots and place your subject in certain areas, get a foreground, get a background, and just kind of using those techniques. Alrighty, and also if you've made it this far, please be sure to subscribe, leave a like on this video. It really helps me out. Stay tuned to the end of the video. You'll see some before and afters of what I did just the other morning. I went out and I took a bunch of photos. So stick around to see that, and there might be a little bit of a surprise at the end of the video as well. So the third and final point here, last but certainly not least, is your editing. This comes last after everything that you've done. Now, if you've done a good job in camera, you don't have to do too much in the editing process and post-processing to get that photo where you want it to be. Settings-wise, when you're shooting, obviously your phone is going to be on an auto mode, so it's going to adjust all your settings for you, your ISO speed, your shutter speed, and your aperture. Now, I used to have a Moto Z, and you can actually do that manually, but that's because they had a whole magnetic camera attachment for it and whatever. But so that was pretty cool. But on the iPhone, it's all automatic. It's going to be like that, and that's all right for what you're doing anyway. I mean, you're shooting on a phone, so you're not really looking to get super in depth. But editing wise, you're going to throw that so that picture goes into your photos. Now, Apple's in-house editing software has actually taken some steps up in recent updates. A lot of the things are now spread out that were grouped together. A lot of things are more individualized. Now, instead of just saturation, now it's saturation and vibrance. Instead of just brilliance, now they broke it up. So now you can actually adjust your highlights, you can bring up your shadows, and you can adjust your contrast, and so instead of just overall brightness or brilliance, they broke it up into individual selections so you can get more in depth with your edits. Now, with the in-house editing software that Apple offers, you cannot do any color correction. So you don't have an HSL tab where you can kind of go in and adjust your settings accordingly there. But for this specific video, kind of what I have coming up on the screen here, my editing process, I used Lightroom Mobile. That's because I already have an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, so I get the full access to Lightroom Mobile. I do believe if you don't have a subscription, you can still get a light version, but it's just kind of the in-house software at that point. So I mean, if you like the way Lightroom is laid out, go ahead and use that. I know I do because it's very similar to the desktop version. It's, instead of having it all on the screen on one side where you can just kind of scroll down, all the selections are at the bottom. There's different menus that you can choose from. I can have my presets on Lightroom Mobile as well, so that's also a really nice feature to have. Then you just do one-click edits. But one thing you do get with Lightroom Mobile, at least the full access, is you do get more in-depth editing options. So you do get clarity, you do get texture, you do get dehaze. So those three are some of my favorite sliders that I like to use, and they help a lot, especially with a very compressed JPEG like an iPhone photo. And you can also do color correction. So you can go into an HSL tab and you can correct your colors. So you can correct reds. So you know, if you've seen an HSL tab, you know what I'm talking about. So it's just kind of, it goes in way more in depth. It's almost like, it's crazy what you can do with even just a JPEG shot on your phone. But another thing, part of Lightroom Mobile that sometimes maybe people don't think about too much is your sharpness and noise reduction. While you can't really do much with the JPEG that you shoot anyway, you can adjust it a little bit. You can kind of, if you're shooting in a low light situation and you do have some grain, you do have some noise, you can use sharpness and noise reduction to, well, do what it says and reduce that noise. Sometimes it can go a little bit too far and it looks like you just kind of smudged over the whole photo and it just looks awful. But a little bit goes a long way with those anyway, even on raw photos. And then the next thing comes with your optics corrections and your geometry corrections. So you can use these options to, if you're shooting all the way out wide, or if you have the new iPhone 11 Pro and you're shooting on that wide angle, you might get a little vignette around the outside, which I might be getting here because I'm shooting really wide. It might be darker in these corners than it is like towards the center, but that's also, I have a light here. But that's just kind of what happens when you're shooting way out wide. You get a vignette around the outside, which is just like a shadow around the edges. So you can do lens profile corrections to help you out there, and then you can add your post-crop vignetting on it if that's something that you're into. For some photos it works out very well, others not so much. If you're wanting to add a more dramatic punched-in feel to it, you can add a vignette around the outside. Also, if you're shooting really wide, you may notice some distortion either at the top or the bottom of your photo or left to the right. Just kind of in the, like if you're shooting at a building, sometimes you might see some curve in the side if you're shooting super wide. That's just because the lens is so wide, the glass is literally distorting what the camera is looking at. So you can actually kind of, with Lightroom Mobile, you can fix that with the geometry, kind of drag around and try to straighten out those edges a little bit. But that's just kind of me rambling on about editing. If you like this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Definitely subscribe for more. I do believe I'm going to be adding one more day a week. I'm going to be doing Wednesdays and Saturdays coming up. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. This was really fun. Let's do it again sometime, and I will see you in the next one.